Hi, my name is Mike Dillard, and this is Self-Made Man, the podcast for men who want to leave their mark on the world and create a legacy of honor, integrity, and achievement in every aspect of their lives. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it is time to forge your destiny. So the vast majority of us as entrepreneurs share a really similar experience. We have an idea, we create a product, and then we figure out how to sell it. And if you get the sales part right, if you learn how to market, you can make millions of dollars per year on your own. But if all of these results are dependent upon you, you will inevitably hit your ceiling or you're going to wither away from exhaustion. If you want your company to continue to grow, you're going to have to find your replacement and build a team, which can be just as risky an endeavor as launching your business in the first place. Well, today we're going to learn how to avoid those risks and how to successfully scale your company from the man who literally wrote the book on the subject, Mr. Verne Harnish. Now, Verne is the author of Mastering the Rockefeller Habits and Scaling Up, and he's also the founder of an extremely important organization that's played a huge role in the lives of thousands of entrepreneurs around the world, including mine, EO, known as Entrepreneurs Organization. If you aren't familiar with EO, go check it out. I was a member here in the Austin chapter for many years, and it is one of the best organizations you can join as an entrepreneur. He is also the chairman of MIT's CEO program called Birthing of Giants and the founder of Gazelles.com, which provides strategic tools and coaching on how to scale your business. This is an extremely valuable conversation that's going to cover everything from how to find your team to creating a simple one-page strategic plan that will align them and everything in between. So please help me welcome Verne Harnish. Welcome back, everybody. Mike Dillard here, and today I am unbelievably excited to introduce you to a very special guest who's had a huge impact on my life over the years, Mr. Verne Harnish. So Verne, welcome to Self-Made Man. I am thrilled for your time today. Thank you so much.
Mike, thanks for hosting me.
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned just a second ago, you've had a big impact on me in many ways, not only through your books like The Rockefeller Habits and Scaling Up, but many years ago, I was a member of the Entrepreneurs Organization, or EO, here in Austin, which was one of the most profound learning experiences I have ever had as an entrepreneur. And you are one of the dozen or so founders of EO. So thank you so much for your contribution to my life so far.
You're welcome. By the way, they got it all sorted out. I am the founder. I pulled together a group as kind of a founding board, but we're getting ready to celebrate our 30th anniversary.
Yeah, 1987. It's unbelievable how you guys have grown now. How many members do you have worldwide at this point?
It's now a little over 12,000.
Awesome. Well, we'll talk about that later. And today, as I was thinking about what we should discuss, there are, I would say, thousands and thousands of entrepreneurs who listen to the show who are at the beginning stages of their career, and they very likely have their first product. They're generating revenue. They're selling that product, and they're kind of thrilled. Another big trend is the whole lifestyle solo entrepreneur trend that has been huge online over the last 10 years or so. So someone's at home, they're running a 6 or 7 figure business from their computer. They're selling their product, and then it kind of stops, and they don't know how to grow it. They don't know how to scale it. And I can't think of anyone better to really enlighten us on that topic than yourself. So why don't we dive in on the difference between a product and an offer that's selling versus a business, and the difference between the two?
Well, first, let's throw some statistics out there, Mike. 76% of the companies in the U.S. are home-based and don't get beyond the entrepreneur as the only employee. And so it is hard to scale. On the flip side, to get into EO, you've got to be doing at least $1 million a year in revenue. And that represents the top 4%. So you're already in pretty elite space when you've hit that million mark. And so 11,000 startups an hour in the world. So I don't think we're hurting for new companies. The challenge has always been, how do you scale? And how do you go from being, a practice, if what you're doing is selling your services, to actually create a company? And part of it's just getting over that magic $1 million mark, where you've kind of proven that there's enough people out there that want to buy your products and services that you can now scale from 10 employees all the way up to 50 to 100. So I think a lot of it just has to do with size. At the end of the day, Google is still selling, ironically, one product, search. And over 90% of the revenue comes from that one product. As you know, they've been trying all kinds of other things. They've stuck it into this new company called Alphabet. But I actually love when a company is only doing one thing. The key is, can you start selling it beyond the local neighborhood?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a topic that we've discussed here many times on the podcast because it's been one of my biggest challenges personally, in the fact that I, at a young age, learned how to sell, have built a couple of businesses that have done 8 figures a year in revenue, just selling 1 or 2 products. Mm-hmm. But I've never had success scaling that up to a large business. And, the last one that I attempted to do, we hired about 12 employees, built an office, and yet revenue didn't change. Overhead went up tremendously. And at the end of the day, year 1, year 2 of having a team now, the net profit at the end of the day on my tax form was exactly the same as it was when I was solo. And yet now I've got 12 people and their families to feed and the stress of that every day.
Yeah.
So what's the secret to this for everybody?
Yeah, that's actually why I wrote the book, Mike. I saw so many of my EO friends who would go out there and double, triple the size of the company, and the bottom line didn't come with it. In fact, many times they were making less, and they're saying, why am I going through all this? Let me just chuck it all in and go back to when it was I and an assistant working out of, a small office, and we were doing much better. And first of all, I think entrepreneurs have to realize that if you look at the S curve of growth, people just have different strengths. There are folks that are really good at the startup. There is then the team that's really good at then scaling up, getting it up that S curve. And then one of the worst things entrepreneurs are at is knowing when to sell. They have a tendency to hold on too long. And whenever that product or that business starts to taper off, they don't really have an ability to manage that cash cow that they have created. And so managing all aspects of that S curve of growth is what we talk about and teach. And knowing which part of that is your strength is a good starting point.
So you really break down, the scaling up process into 4 areas: people, strategy, execution, and cash. Would you mind walking us through each of those?
You bet. So let's take a look at the people side. And this was one of the best ideas that Regis McKenna, who was coaching Steve Jobs at the time, and Andy Grove at Intel and the folks at Genentech. I cold called him when I was in college and wanted to start this global entrepreneurship organization. And I asked him if he would coach me. And surprisingly, he said yes. And he said, all right, I'll put you through the same process I'm putting Steve. And it's the first thing that we suggest entrepreneurs do if they want to scale. And that is take a piece of paper out and write down who are the top 25 most influential people that you need to get behind whatever it is that you want to scale. This father and son team scaled a device that makes it easier for you to harvest local honey. And they took the thing to 12 million in 30 days on an Indiegogo campaign. But the key was the son sat down and said, all right, who are the handful of bloggers that can reach millions of people that would have an interest in this particular product? And he nurtured those relationships. And so when the campaign started, he hit $1 million in revenue in its first 3 hours. They qualified for EO in 3 hours and then doubled revenue 11 hours later. When I launched this entrepreneurs organization, first thing I just took a piece of paper out, as they suggested, and they said, look, the bigger the names, the faster your scale. And so, look, I was young and dumb, and I just wrote down President Ronald Reagan. We had launched there in the 80s. And I said, look, if I could get him to be the first president to talk about the importance of entrepreneurs, that would be significant. And I wrote down Steve Jobs and Michael Dell, and I wanted the owners of Venture Magazine and Inc. Magazine. I didn't know who they were at the time, but I knew if I could get them behind what it was we were doing, we could scale much faster. And sure enough, by making the list and then working it, an hour every week, networking my way to the right people. Mike, we were global in 36 months. And we're hosting 1,200 entrepreneurs in LA with Steve Jobs' first public speech after being fired from Apple, and President Ronald Reagan committing to fly in to do the opening, and Venture and Inc. magazine's owners Bernie Goldhirsch and Arthur Lipper becoming dear friends over all these years. Bernie, though, having passed away quite a while ago. And I was amazed at the power of that process. And so whatever industry, niche, geography you're in, right now I encourage all the listeners to take that piece of paper out and say, all right, which writer at the newspaper or trade association, which politician, which 3 or 4 bloggers, which influential citizens or customers or whoever they think it is, that if we could get them to get supportive and behind whatever it is that we're trying to do, you're going to scale further faster. So it's always, Mike, a who question, and making the list and working it. By the way, one very specific hint is use Google Alerts. You know, if I want to get to somebody, Herman Simon, I spent 3 years trying to get him to be my mentor and support our current business. And what you do is you put their name and their company name in Google Alerts. And so if anything, and you get to know their assistant really well. Then if anything pops about them in the news, you're aware of it and you've got a reason to reach out to that person. You also want to figure out a way to give to them first. And by the way, just acknowledging an honor they received or an article they wrote or, you know, some piece of recognition is in a way a small gift that you are giving, so that when then you're ready to receive their help, you've earned it.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that I've picked up on as you've been talking is that you've mentioned twice now you've had 2 individuals that you would consider mentors that have helped you along the path. And I think that's really interesting because you know, thinking about mentors in my life, I've had a lot of people and leaders that I've learned from, but I can't say that I've had an actual mentor on, let's say, an official basis where we've got a weekly or monthly call for years at a time, and someone that I've learned from. There are certainly coaches that you can hire that it's you know, a financial transaction thing, which is great too. But I thought that's interesting that you've mentioned that here in the first 5 minutes twice. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, first, I'd recommend all the listeners to go read Keith Ferrazzi's book, Who's Got Your Back? And I think he lays it out very well, the importance of having a handful of people who've got your back, that have nothing but your best interests at heart. And to the extent that they've got significant success and contacts, that is extremely helpful. My dad had a very successful company. Then we lost it all, Mike. And I ended up, when I went off to college, quite, poor, paying for it myself. And I'd read that Andrew Carnegie said it's critical that you live in a great neighborhood. And I managed to get this job, and I heard that the chairman of the company lived in the right neighborhood, was a member of YPO, knew all of the right people. And so, like, second day on the job, I went up to him and asked him if I could live with him and his wife. And he was taken aback initially, but he went and talked to Jerry, his wife, and she said yes. And the rest is history. Dawn ended up opening a tremendous number of doors for me, Mike, and in fact led to what I'm doing today very directly. And so I think, read Keith's book and find some folks that have got your back. Awesome.
Part 2 of, the process here is strategy. What does that mean for everybody listening?
Well, first of all, if you can't state it simply, it's going to be hard to execute. And that's the irony here, is that as you scale, you just need to keep it simpler. And so I like to point out, these 2 words made a guy $4 billion, and it was, deliver pizza. And that was Domino's. That was Tom Monahan. And he then went on to say, look, we're going to deliver pizza in 30 minutes or less, what we're going to call a brand promise, or it's free, what we call a brand promise guarantee. And right there, those 3 components are 3 of the 7 decisions that we outline in the book that will really help you create kind of an industry dominating, kind of competition crushing strategy. And it starts with, what is the word or two you think you can own in enough minds in order to scale the business? I've got a dear friend, Anne Marie, who is the soap making queen of the United States. Darius Bickoff, took water. Nobody could own the word water, added some vitamins and minerals to it, and created a whole new beverage category called enhanced waters. That it as vitamin water, and he ended up, before his 40th birthday, selling that to Coke for $4.1 billion. When my wife gave birth to our first child 20 years ago, we wanted the safest automobile, and it was a no-brainer. I bought her a Volvo. And so brand, and I think a lot of folks are confused by that. They think brand's all about the logo and the colors and all that stuff. Brand, at the end of the day, is figuring out what is a word or two that I can own in enough minds. Our client, Trench Safety, his company makes sure that if you're a construction company and you're digging a trench and you want to make sure that it doesn't collapse and hurt anyone, you want to work with his firm, Trench Safety. And so that's the big decision, first decision in terms of strategy. I think everyone listening to this podcast needs to get clear about. Again, the Google AdWords can be very helpful. Tim Ferriss, when he wrote his first book, had this really nerdy title, and thank goodness his publisher pushed back on it. And so Tim went out and began just doing A/B split tests, and that's where he came across this, what became the two words he's known by, 4-hour. When he then wrote 4-hour work week, 4-hour body, 4-hour, all the stuff that he's done. And so that's key. Again, go back and use the search engines to help you figure this out.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable advice. And I'm sitting here brainstorming. I can articulate what my companies are about in a sentence, but I've never distilled them down to a word, which I think is really, really powerful and a very valuable exercise. Mm-hmm.
And by the way, that's what killed Yahoo. Google stole the word search from Yahoo, and Yahoo never figured out another word to own. So they didn't own any space in your mind. You couldn't compartmentalize them. You didn't know what to do with them. And that was the first huge failure. And so, by the way, if you want to hurt a competitor, steal their word. Become known as the best Italian restaurant for families, in your community. And that's a lot about what TripAdvisor and having dominant positions on those engines is all about, is figuring out your niche and owning it.
So, well, I'm going to save this question for later. We'll keep going down this path. So part 3 of your process is execution.
Yeah, and there it's all about, let me suggest another book. I consider it the best business book ever written, and it's called The Gold by Eli Goldratt. And Eli was right. It's all about the theory of constraints. You've set this goal, you've picked a mountain that you want to climb, and you start climbing, and you're going to run into problems, constraints. And it's all about every day figuring out what's the biggest constraint that's in your way that you need to remove next. And even though you've got 1,000 things to do, you've got to look at them like dominoes lined up, and you've got to take enough quiet time. We're really big into meditation. I think it's a very important routine, and you've got to figure out what is that front domino. And then once you decide, I remember when my company got in trouble, it was very simple. I was trying to drive it on a 42% gross margin, and everyone told me it needed to be at 55%. I didn't believe them until I got my head handed to me. And so I got religion and said, look, on next 90 days, I'm going to figure out how to get this thing to 55%. And you've got to stay on it. When Mark Zuckerberg saw the shift, in the marketplace from PCs to mobile, even though he was getting ready to go public in 2012, he pulled his team together in a quarterly meeting, said, look, over the next 90 days, I want you to keep your head down, stay focused, and get us mobile. And for the next 90 days, that's what they focus on. And even though they had 1,000 other things to do, and sure enough, they got mobile, and the rest is history. Yahoo never did. And then once you figure out the constraint, Mike, the thing that we're well known for, it seems crazy, is this daily huddle. this, 5 to 15 minutes where you kind of huddle up with the team, whether it's just one other person or your team of 12. And if that's done right, that'll replace hours of email and trying to solve problems kind of asynchronously. And you'll get more done in those few minutes in terms of communication and identification of what's in our way in the next 24 hours. And by the way, all of Silicon Valley runs on the daily huddle. There's no one, Facebook, Amazon, Google, would think to write a line of code if they didn't have those teams in a daily huddle as part of what's called Agile or Scrum. And it works so well in creating software that it's an idea that ports to all activities and aspects of the business. And so this daily huddle, if you want to move faster, pulse faster.
So, to use myself as an example here, let's just say it's just me. I've got a 7-figure business, and now I want to become the number one brand in my industry. Obviously, I need to go from just the salesperson to essentially the CEO, which is a very different role. And outside of your book and a few others out there, there's not a lot of blueprints on exactly how to do that step by step. What is the first thing that I need to do? Is it pursuing hiring a specific individual? And if so, who is that? But what do I need to do next?
Yeah. So we have a tool called FACE, the Function Accountability Chart. And, Jim Collins said, you got to get the right butts in the right seats, but he didn't give us a list of seats. So we put a list together. And anyone who's started up a business will recognize that in the beginning, it's you that's doing everything. It's me, 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 me. And if you want to scale, you've got to do it through people. Generally speaking, whether they're a direct employer or you're outsourcing. Mike, even though most lone entrepreneurs, if you're doing 7 figures, it's because you're working with lots of other folks that are making stuff for you, or helping you sell stuff, or you're using their technologies or platforms or whatever the case is. Those are those critical relationships that you've brought into your sphere in order to help you. They don't have to be on your direct payroll. And I remember, like most entrepreneurs, the first one I gave away was bookkeeping. You still have to keep track of it to keep the IRS off your back. And when you bring these people on, look, they can make your life easy or your life will be miserable. That's about as black and white as it is. And they really have to pass 3 tests. First, they kind of get you. I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs make the mistake where they find this, friend who was a top executive, big company that took a division to 10 million, and they're like, hey, join my team and let's do it again. And there's no culture fit. They come out of a big company environment and you're, a scrappy entrepreneur. So there has to be this kind of culture fit. Number 2, they have to wow you. It's like, wow, even it's part-time. Wow, that's better than I could have done it on my own. And nothing's more frustrating for entrepreneurs because they're usually highly talented. They feel like, man, I could do this myself. And that's where you get trapped because you end up doing everything yourself. And then last, they should need managed. So my bookkeeper was across the street, and she had worked with her husband, was one of the top entrepreneurs in our community. I knew that she got my situation. And I would just send stuff over to her. She didn't need managed at all. And she would often come back to me and say, wow, that, Verne, I don't know if you've seen, but here's some things that the numbers are saying that you might be interested in. And those would be those wow events. Now, I want to answer your question very directly, though. The most important position you ultimately have to hire is that which replaces you. My guess is, Mike, like I said, you could sell ice to Eskimos. And so therefore, the toughest thing is to bring on that first salesperson or that first chief marketing officer. I've driven marketing, for my companies. But about 2 years ago, I finally woke up and said, all right, I'm going to bring on my first real chief marketing officer. Started out part-time. And I shouldn't have been surprised. Revenue jumped 60%. And all I wanted to do was just stab myself, realizing I should have made this move, 5 years earlier.
Interesting. See, I thought your answer was going to be different.
No. Well, but look, if you don't hire if you bring on somebody cheap, that you're going to manage, you're going to be badly disappointed. That the toughest person to hire is the one that's going to replace you so you can move into the CEO role.
So that led me to my next question, which was, how did you find this individual? Because when I have a story in my head that I love your feedback on, and the story is that if someone could replace me because they could sell as good as I am, they wouldn't want a job. They would have their own business. So what's wrong with that logic?
Well, look, you built a company. It is really hard in terms of all the moving parts and pieces that you have to pull together in order to make it happen. If it was easy, again, a lot of folks start things, as we know, 11,000 an hour, but it is hard to scale it to any kind of size, even $1 million, to qualify for EO. So, and it's crazy, but a lot of people like to be led. And so you're looking for that talent that wants to be part of a team. They don't want to do it by themselves. And they're looking for some leadership, some direction and vision. And so and you've got that in spades.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I just project my personal desire or aversion to those things. I want to be the lead. I don't want to be led. And I just project that onto other individuals and assume that they would feel the same way. And that's just, that's been a challenge for me to get over. But, if you wouldn't mind, I am incredibly curious on how you went about finding that CMO for yourself.
Yeah. And there we take out the same piece of paper I recommended earlier, and we sit down. I literally sit down with an entrepreneur and I say, let's write out 25 names. I just did this at our CEO boot camp last week, where an entrepreneur said, look, I need this chief operator, the COO. I know it's what's got me constrained and stuck. I'm spending way too much time on the day-to-day stuff and not out doing the things that I enjoy doing. And so we did. We took a piece of paper out. We started thinking through. And what I recommend is folks that you've worked with already in the past, or people you've worked with that would know this person. A players know A players. And within 30 minutes, he figured out who this person ought to be. And it's almost never failed. You already know them. You just don't know it, and you haven't taken the time to think about it. And those are much better people to bring into the company than try to purely headhunt a stranger. It's one of the reasons why Noam Wasserman's research at Harvard showed that intact teams that left an existing, say, larger company together and launched grew much further faster than the lone entrepreneur who then had to go out and find this talent. So one of the things we actually recommend to young people is absolutely go work for a big company first. Steve Jobs did, Steve Wozniak did. And there you're going to make a lot of contacts. You're going to meet a lot of people. You're going to have a chance to work with folks, whether they're inside the company or as suppliers or customers. And that's when you begin to source your A team, so that you've already passed those kind of storming, norming phases of putting a team together and already know how to fight without killing each other in the process. I don't think it's by accident that both Apple and Microsoft and Google were founded by a team, two friends versus the lone entrepreneur.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to compensation, for those key individuals, what's your philosophy behind that? Because there are literally dozens of different opinions and ways that you could structure that. Do you have, are you into profit sharing? Are you into equity over time? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah. The compensation, in fact, we're just writing a little mini book called Scaling Up Compensation, because it is such a critical decision. It's your biggest expense for most companies. And we make decisions on comp about as amateurishly as we do pricing, which is a whole nother topic that I find entrepreneurs are weak at. The key is it's personal preference, Mike. It has to fit your culture. Kip and Garrett, who founded the Container Store, they truly wanted the team spirit. And as a result, there isn't a penny of, say, commission or bonus compensation. They just pay people twice what everyone else would pay a retail employee. So we sit down individually with the entrepreneur, look at their core values and structure the comp plan to match. If you believe in this kind of fierce independence and you eat what you kill, you're going to have a compensation plan that's highly variable and probably sharing profit. If it's not part of your culture, then don't. And so there's a lot of ways to skin the same cat.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that brings us to the fourth component here, which is cash. And so where does cash come into the business as far as your scaling up process goes?
Well, rule number one, don't run out.
Right.
you can get by with decent people, decent strategy, decent execution, but not a day without cash. And here I'm going to recommend another book. I'm a huge fan of a dear friend of mine, John Mullins, now professor at London Business School's book called The Customer Funded Business. The title gives the answer. I think we're going back to the future. It's very, very, very few companies that really should go out and get venture backing or even angel funding. You're much better off to find that first customer that's willing to put up the funds to get you to create that product unique for them, and then go out and spin it out and see if you can sell it to others. Costco, what a crazy business model to think that you're going to charge a membership. People are going to have to pay to have the privilege to come in your store and spend a lot of money. Yet those Costco membership fees represent 2/3 of their entire profitability and have funded all of their CapEx expenditures. Amazon should be dead, because of how unprofitable they've been for years. Yet Amazon Prime has helped them survive. Even Elon Musk, here's a guy that needs $4 billion to launch a factory, and what's he do? Pre-sell 400,000 cars at $1,000 deposit, and there's this interest-free, equity-free $4 billion loan that he received. And that's what's beautiful about Kickstarter and Indiegogo campaigns. One of our clients right now has just launched literally the coolest e-bike. It literally is an e-bike that doesn't look like an electric bike. And I just checked the campaign 8 days in, they've already pre-sold $200,000 worth of this $1,500 bike. And that's precisely the funding that they need then to get things geared up at the factories in order to get these things delivered by August. And so whether, it's gift cards or when I got in cash trouble, I went to 17 of my customers and asked them to prepay what they would spend with me for the year for a small discount, and they did it. We still do that today. And I get an entire year's worth of payroll in the bank, and I got to tell you, you sleep so much easier and you age so much slower when you've got that customer's cash. So read John Mullins' book.
Yeah, I'm of the same opinion as you when it comes to that. And I had a podcast episode with the founder of CreativeLive.com, which is an e-learning site for artists, right? So Chase Jarvis. And Chase's story was interesting. When this topic came up, he's like, Mike, you can't afford not to raise capital these days because if you don't, your competition will, and they're just going to outspend you to take over, the niche in the marketplace. And I thought that was a really interesting perspective that I hadn't really considered before. So do you think there is a time in the development or the scaling process of your business where you should go ahead and do that in order to secure the number one slot in your industry, if you will?
Yeah, because it is, by the way, it's not who starts up first, but scales up first that wins. But first, it's so rare, Mike. I mean, of your listeners, if it's 1/10 of 1%, I probably are 10 times too big. The key is don't do it until you prove the model. And that's why Brad Feld, who's helping us out on our Scale Up University initiative, he's co-founder of Techstars and one of the leading venture capitalists. And he became frustrated looking at the millions wasted and the years wasted on failed ideas. And so with Techstars, they built a model where for a few $1,000s in a few months, you should be able to, in kind of a lean startup methodology, lots of iterations, get very quickly to plan B, C, D, or E to, a viable enough product or service that you can know that you've got a winner. And then you want to pour on the gasoline, but not until you have a bona fide, proven product or service. And I've got literally, my wife and I made a decision tonight to put a big chunk of change in a friend of ours company, but Dan has spent the year in alpha and beta with 100 now different customer groups, working with the service that he offers, that we know it's real, and now we're going to pour on the gasoline in order to scale it up quickly.
Yeah, makes sense. What is your advice when it comes to creating a board of advisors, if you will, and specifically offering a small portion of equity in exchange for that position?
Yeah, by the way, I'm glad you said board of advisors instead of board of directors. Normally these folks don't want that kind of fiduciary responsibility that comes with being a board of directors. So you want some advisors. And at least in my case, I've never had to give up any equity to those advisors. That may change with this new venture we've got that we think we're going to, take to $500 million. But, if you're going to scale to, 5 million, 10 million, the main thing the advisors want is a great student. I don't make them come to meetings. I have their cell phones. It may be a 5-minute phone call on a Saturday evening, once every few months, where I've got really a tough issue and I need their advice. And what I tend to do is I send to their spouse a $250 gift certificate to his or her favorite restaurant. And I've got bigger support from the spouses because of that than I have actually sometimes the advisors. And that's been sufficient. What they can't stand is for them to give of their time and advice, and then you don't do anything about it. So I stay in very close contact, and I constantly close the loop with them on their ideas. And right now we've got one of the top literally executives in the world that's been advising us and coming to our strategy sessions, and not a dollar yet, penny of equity or funding has exchanged hands.
So no official strategies, really just go with the flow and make sure that their time is appreciated and utilized.
Yeah, like I said, very specific. I do not make them come to meetings. I take maybe 5 or 10 minutes of their time when I do need it. And I've got them focus on a very specific project. I'm not asking for their general help for the business, but I asked John Coney, who was running Dell Learning, when we decided to pivot into online learning, to advise us. And it was very precise and very specific, so I wasn't wasting his time. Yet I was taking advantage of his deep expertise.
Absolutely. So Verne, we're coming up on the top of our hour here. We've got a few minutes left. One of the things that I know is a really big part of y'all's process, and I think will be very, very useful for everybody listening, is y'all's one-page strategic plan. And I believe y'all have that available for download somewhere, correct?
It is, yeah. All you have to do is go to scalingup.com, the name of the book, and all of our tools, our people, strategy, execution, and cash tools are all up there, open source for people to download. And there's even a free chapter on how to kind of prepare and run a strategic planning session, really the nuts and bolts of it. But yes, we became best known for this one-page strategic plan. About 40,000 companies around the world use it. And we've created now a summary of that. We almost now see, Mike, this one page as a worksheet and several other worksheets that we've created around strategy that support then this thing we call a one-page vision summary. And it's a handful of decisions that if an entrepreneur can nail them down and get them shared with their team, it creates tremendous alignment.
And I'm glad you just mentioned that, because I was going to ask you to go over it. But from a nutshell perspective, what is the point and the purpose of a one-page strategic plan?
Well, it's to get a handful of the key vision decisions, defined. And those 4 key are, number one, what are the company's core values? What are those handful of rules of the game? That if you cross, you're going to get a yellow card or a red card and you're out, using a soccer analogy. On the flip side, the other set of white lines are, what are your 3 brand promises? And by the way, Cialdini was right, the father of influence. If you want to convince somebody to buy your product or service, give them 3 reasons. 3 is better than 2 or 4, and much better than a list of 10. And those 3 promises really instruct the team on what we need to do, and particularly what we don't need to do. Third, then, is the purpose, the kind of thing that Simon Sinek's talked a lot about in his book, Why. But, making you rich is probably not reason enough for folks to remain excited. There's got to be something bigger that you want to try to achieve, part of this company. And then, where are we headed? What Jim Collins and Jerry Porras called the big, hairy, audacious goal. Where are we going in the next 10 to 25 years? And so if we have the BHAG, and then we know the rules of the road, the core values, and the brand promises, the 2 ditches on either side, and then we've got a reason for do it besides just making a lot of money. You've got the 4 key components. Then all you do is start climbing the mountain, and you got to figure out, all right, what do we have to do in the next 36 months? What do you have to do in the next 12 months? And most importantly, what's right in front of us over the next 90 days? And you pretty well have a decent plan.
Awesome. Fantastic. That's a huge resource, and everybody will be linking to that in the show notes of this episode. And Verne, one last question for you. It's going to be 2020 before we know it. A few months away, if you will, a few dozen months away. What do you think is critical for entrepreneurs to think about and consider these days when it comes to sales, marketing, growing a business? Because we've really entered the exponential side of the curve here, if you will, when it comes to technology and the tools that are available to us as business owners.
Yeah, well, I think really 3 things. I think first, if you're not figuring out how artificial intelligence is how you're going to partner with AI to scale whatever it is that you're doing. And you don't have to fund AI. There's a lot of companies out there now that provide it as software as a solution. And so whatever your product or service is, you need to add AI, or some 22-year-old's going to and put you out of business. Number 2, I think it's ideal over the next few years. I think it's better to buy a company than to start a company. We've got this really unique period in our history where about 3 million businesses need to change hands because of the baby boom. And I find it's much easier to scale something that's already at 1 million and kind of fix it and then take it to 10 million than it is to start from scratch. And I've really been encouraging millennials to look at the buy versus build approach. And then number 3, the mistake entrepreneurs make is they don't sell soon enough. They don't know when to exit because we're not really good at piecing those next S curves together, as you open the show and discussed. And so,
when
get
is
it
that?
up.
When is that point? Yeah. Well, when is that?
You know when you need to sell it? When you're the most excited about it.
Ah, interesting.
And because that's when you're going to get everybody else most excited about it. But instead, you're like, wow, it's just getting fun. And then you hang on until you write it down, and then that's sad.
Is that an eventuality? The ride on the way down, is that something that's going to happen to 89% of businesses because the founder's going to get, the risk that I see of that happening, the founder gets lackadaisical and lazy. The cash flow is coming in, everything's easy, the struggle's over, and also tech and the market changes. And you're kind of the old dog in a new industry, and what you've been doing is no longer really working, right? So, is that typically what you see happens?
Exactly. Yeah, the minute it starts to slow it at all, you lose interest, or you're making enough money that you've lost interest, and that's a time when you ought to find somebody who has interest that's willing to pay you a chunk of change, and you can take your chips off the table. And what's interesting is half the time they then mess it up. You can go back and buy it back from them for 10 cents on the dollar. That's what Ted Leonsis did. One of my founding board members who went on to be vice chairman of AOL. His first small company, he sold it to Harris Corporation. They then blew it up and he bought it back for 10 cents on the dollar. He did that when he was in his 20s. And so I think exit sooner than later if you can.
So one last question to close a loop that you brought up a minute ago, because this has come up twice recently in episodes, which is on the AI side. In fact, that's what we talked about last week. And
Cool.
That sounds great. Awesome. But from a practical standpoint, where do I go to even figure out if that's an option, right? Like I'd assume one of the most available companies as a service out there that I could tap on to get some kind of AI capability would be around my data and analytics to bring in some intelligence when it comes to that side of the house. So do you know of any firms or service companies available that I could hire to, bring on that piece of technology into my business?
Well, again, I think it's picking your supplier. So, for instance, there was a big announcement this last week that Salesforce has partnered with IBM Watson. And that would scream that, hey, if I'm looking for a CRM, it may be a little pricey, but maybe I want to build on the Salesforce platform instead of another one as a result. Because they're going to have this AI capability. Same with HubSpot, same with a lot of the other service providers that you have access to. If you've got a choice, you want to look at which is the one that is building on an analytics engine versus just providing the service. And you want to go default because they're going to provide you the kind of tools and data and analytics that you're going to be able to take advantage of. And by the way, the biggest player in that space are the Microsofts and the Googles and the Amazons that small companies are able to utilize and partner with today. And so a lot of us are already utilizing AI. We just don't realize it because it's what's powering Facebook and Amazon and Google and a lot of the other tools that we use as a way to sell our products.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's at the beginning stages of this, but I'm sure there are going to be consulting companies out there who can provide these kinds of services on an individual basis to your business. And essentially, I think what you're going to be getting as the customer is an increased level of efficiency on your marketing spend, cost of goods sold, whatever it may be. And if you're not on that razor's edge of efficiency and your competitors are, then guess what? You eventually lose. So if anybody knows of any companies out there that are offering services like that, I would be very interested in hearing about them and learning more about it. So
yeah. In fact, I just in my insights, I just reported on The Grid, which is a company that uses AI to create websites for small business owners. It's that kind of services that are popping up that we can take advantage of and use. I don't know as much. I wouldn't be looking. There may be some consultants out there. They're likely not going to want to work with small businesses, but I would, again, partner with suppliers and other service providers that have these capabilities already built in, and you can take advantage of them and go to their user conferences. And that's where you're going to pick up how to actually put AI to work in your business and industry.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, Verne, this has been a fantastic episode, just absolutely filled with tons of nuggets and resources. So you've mentioned at least 3 or 4 books here on the show today. Guys, we're going to put those in the show notes once again. We'll link those up for Amazon for you as well. Verne, obviously, scalingup.com. Where should everybody go to connect with you and Scaling Up?
Yep, that's it. Go to scalingup.com. I've got a Thursday Insight that's complimentary that always lists these kind of really nuggets and links and resources that can help companies scale up. So hopefully folks will sign up for that. And let me just summarize, put your list of 25 together, figure out the word or two you're going to own, follow the constraint, and then pound on it daily. And then, figure out ways to get the customers to fund you, grow on their cash.
Absolutely. Well, thank you once again. This was a pleasure. It was great to finally connect. And is there any way that my audience can serve you or help you with a particular challenge that you might have right now? You know what? Scale-ups are critical to our economy, Mike. They're like the forgotten middle class of companies. And so, you're doing, the greatest thing you can for your community and our country and the world by just, getting on and getting people hired and scaling up the business. And so that's enough. And that's why we're in the business of what we do. Awesome. And before I forget, if you're doing $1 million a year or more in revenue, go check out eonetwork.org. Join your local EO chapter. It was a fantastic experience for me. And definitely something I would highly recommend that you guys get involved with. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you once again, Verne, for joining us. And we'll see you guys next week. Take care.
Thanks, Mike.